Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Wisconsin Literacy Fall Conference session. Teaching math isn't scary. Um, I am very pleased to have our guest presenter, Elizabeth Sauer here from the United Community Education Center. And she is an adult education teacher at the Oneida Nation Community Education Center. And she has worked in education for 19 years, teaching everything from Head Start to adult learners. And she relies on her husband for human calculator, but her children all prefer mom to help them with their math homework instead of dad. So thank you again for being here. I will turn it over to you, Elizabeth.
All right. Hello. Okay, so my camera's on one screen. Everybody's over there, and my presentation's kind of floating in between. So excuse me if I look like I'm not paying attention. I promise I am. Last week, I actually was at the National Indian Education Association conference. So I did quite a bit of this before I left, and I added something that I learned last week that I thought was kind of a cool thing that applied while I was at that conference. And this is a quote that they said several times in the one math session that I went to, that school math hides mathematics' role as a cornerstone of our civilization. And it really does when you think about it, because we had to have math in order to have shelter. Somehow they had to figure out a system of math, right? Somehow they had to figure out a system of math in order to help with growing foods in the fields and even harvesting and gathering and how long to cook them and everything like that. So math has been around as long as art, which is something we associate with ancient times. But we really don't think about it that way. When we're learning it in school, and therefore a lot of times I think the way it gets taught everywhere and believed about is there is one right way to do things. And there is only one right way, which is why when people suddenly the instruction techniques change, people get a little frustrated because suddenly it looks like they're doing something wrong. But that can then lead that idea that there's only one right way to do it. It has to be done the same way. Math has to be done the same way we learned it in school. It can lead to people being scared. It can lead to people being disinterested. It can lead to people being like, I don't need to do this. I don't need to know it because it doesn't apply to me. But math is really in everything we do. And by the way, I'm not a math teacher. I'm a social studies teacher and former archaeologist prior to that. So I don't necessarily like math either, school math, but I know that it is something that it is all around us and we need to be able to do. So that beauty of math is really not present in the way that we learn it when we're in school. And in adult education, we're dealing with people who have some form of educational trauma that caused them to come out of schooling at some point before they were finished. So we need to make sure that we are presenting math to them in a way that doesn't necessarily replicate, in my personal opinion, I should say, doesn't replicate what they went through in the school classroom. So trying to find a way that is much more interesting, much more applicable. And I know that's something that everybody struggles with constantly. I hear it when I work with my K-12 tutoring boys. What do I need to know this geometry? And I have very small windows, and I'm like, believe it or not, that couch over there in that corner can fit through that window. You go tell me how it's going to fit. He didn't do that though, but someday he always says he's going to. So we need to kind of take a look at math as being something that's been around for a long time, and it has something that can be done that isn't the way that we are constantly learning it. Okay, so I have this activity that I got from the Adult Numeracy Center, which is based out of Massachusetts. I don't know if anybody else has heard of it. This is an activity where we're going to kind of talk about how you can approach math in multiple different ways. So you're going to see a series of dots, or in this case, I'm using skulls because I love Halloween. I am a spooky person, absolutely 100%. So had to go with the Halloween theme for this. So you're going to see a series of dots, skulls, on the screen only for a few seconds. Your job is to not count them one by one, but to be able to tell me how many dots were on the screen. All right, everybody ready? How many dots were on the screen? I know it went really quickly. That was on purpose. Okay. Okay. 10
I'll
and 12
start the
seem,
guesses in the chat.
I'm seeing 10 and 12. I did this with somebody yesterday. She came back with 8. Anybody else got another guess? 12? Okay. So this is how many there were. Anybody know how many there are now? If you count them one by one, you'll find that there are 10. 10 dots. So the next question with this is, how did you see how many dots there were so that you knew very quickly how many there were? How did you visualize that when I asked you to tell me how many dots were there? Counted by twos, pattern, groupings of 4. Group them, group them, group them. Yep. 2 groups of 2 on the top and bottom, and assume there were 10 in the middle. Okay. So this is an activity from the Adult Numeracy's a newsletter. I don't exactly remember when it was. It was not a recent one. They had done this at a training in person, and they had asked people to draw a picture of how they saw those groupings. Because pretty much everybody said they saw them by groups and they saw them by patterns. So this is what they had at the end of it. So you see there's 8 names here, and there are 8, actually 9 really different ways that they grouped those dots together. And that allowed them to very quickly then count how many there were. So if you have 8 people and 9 different ways to approach that, one big takeaway that you can have from this is that there's really no right way to see these dots. I think every time I've gone through and looked at my presentation, I have seen them in a different way on the screen. So you can think of math then as having room for interpretation, which is not something we are normally taught. And when you can move into that way of thinking, it becomes less scary. It becomes less, I'm going to mess it up if I don't do it 100% perfect. I know when I was a classroom teacher, I had a 4th grader. It didn't matter how many times I told him, you have to follow this pattern. This is the rules. These are what we're doing. He always did it his own way, and he always came up with the same answer. And I think it was really him that made me go, you know what? Maybe there is some room for interpretation here, because he was seeing the numbers on the page in a completely different way than I was seeing them, but yet he always knew how to have the right answer. So when you look at things differently and agree that we don't have to have 100% the same way, it becomes more interesting and it's easier to think about it. So this is another activity too, the same thing, where they looked at fractions. So we've got kind of this, I was going for a candy corn look here, kind of hard to do with this shapes, but very distinct shape. The whole shape is sort of a trapezoid. So out of this whole trapezoid, what fraction or how much of the whole shape is this orange trapezoid shape? So how much of the whole shape is that orange trapezoid? Go ahead and throw a guess in the chat. Not a clue. Yeah, that was kind of my first impression too when I looked at it. 1/6. 3/4 of 1/3. 1/5. Okay. So this one, I think, becomes a little bit more obvious that there are definitely different ways to approach math. So in one person, they took the small triangle and they said, I think I can fit this into all these shapes. And then they counted the number of those little triangles that they had, so they could come up with the final number. So again, it's a fraction. They wanted the bottom number. The bottom number is 12. And then they went and they counted how many of those triangles were that orange trapezoid. So if you count them, there's 3. So they came up with 3/12. I don't know if anybody got that same answer. Another person said, you know what? I got 3 big triangles. I can very easily see that. Then I can take the one triangle that has the orange trapezoid in it, take that little triangle shape, break everything up equally, and I can see that it is 3 of that. So there's 3 big triangles, and in one of the triangles, it's 3/4. So I had to laugh because one person did put 3/4 of 1/3, and that's exactly the answer they came up with that. And then another example that they had was somebody said, well, I'm looking for a trapezoid. So they found 3 trapezoids, which left 3 of these little triangle shapes. So they pulled those out, put them together, made a 4th trapezoid. So now they have 4 trapezoids. One of them is that orange shape and left with 1/4. Now the interesting thing is 3/4 of 1/3 and 3/12 all equal 1/4. So we have 3 different ways to answer this question, 3 different ways to get the right answer. Nobody was wrong with that, right? So there are different ways to approach math, different ways to solve the problem. And I know when I worked at the high school, I heard that constantly from one of the math teachers. It did not matter how the student got the right answer so much as how they got it. Now, there were some teachers who were a little bit, no, do it my way. But as long as the student was able to figure it out, they were good with however they got there. So I mentioned a couple of times the Adult Numeracy Center. It's also part of an organization called TURC, and I forget what TURC stands for. They have this math curriculum. And when they was first asked about doing this math presentation, I was like, I'm going to wind up talking about this curriculum, and I don't want to turn it into a commercial. And it's not going to be, I promise. But this is a really nice math curriculum that we came across. This is the one that we've been using for about the last 6 months here at the CEC. A couple of different, this is just taken from their website, a couple of different things. It has the 7 workbooks that cover pretty much all the things people need to know according to the HSCD competencies and what they need to know for the GED math. It does come with a separate teacher book and a student book. It's great. There is even an online version, but the online version, in all honesty, is just the pages out of the teacher book and the student book saved as PDFs. So it's not great website. Just get the workbooks if you want to do that. You can purchase them as a set, and you can purchase them as individual books. I really liked them, and I first learned about it when I went to a COABE conference, and they were actually there. You could pick them up and you could look at them. Having just at that point recently come out of the classroom, I really wanted a curriculum that had teacher lesson plans. So this is an example of one of the teacher lesson plans. This is from the book Split It Up, which is about fractions, decimals, and percentages. So you kind of get a synopsis, you get an objectives, and then the next page will be, here's your opening discussion, and you can see where these, where the speech bubbles are. Say these things to your students, say these things in class. Couple other nice things about it is it was all written for adult learners who are coming back into the classroom. It is aligned with Common Core standards. It is also written to be reachable to people who have low literacy skills. So it is really great from the teacher perspective. Everything runs through a series of activities after an opening discussion and then a follow-up discussion. And then there's, of course, different homework that they have to do. This is the activity for 1/10, labeling the fractions, strips, looking for equivalent fractions and whatnot. Again, I from the teacher's perspective, did really like this particular curriculum. We've used a couple. I have a lot of them. When I came in, a lot of our curriculum was at least 15, 20 years old. So it was time to update and get some better things. Another nice thing about this curriculum is it does a lot of stuff with stations-based activities and partner activities. So it gets people up and moving. It gets people kind of interacting with one another. They're not just sitting there doing things individually. And then everything ends with a test practice to kind of replicate questions that they might have on the tests, on the GED tests and what. So it sounds like a really good curriculum. Sounds like I'm really talking it up. I am. I'm going to tell you why I'm now talking about it with a small caveat on the next slide there. These are some student feedback that I've got. Now, I did ask several of our students to kind of tell me what they felt, because like I said, we've been using it about 6 months. What did you think? I had one group that actually went through the geometry workbook in a class. So they said things like, this makes more sense. I knew more than I thought. I liked how you got to get up and move around. I liked that it treated me like an adult compared to some of the other curriculums that are out there. But then most of our students lately have been going through this on an individual basis, kind of self-based learning, coming in to find out more about it. So the way they say things doesn't always make sense, which is true. When I was teaching it, as a class, I could get up there and I could rephrase things. I frequently did. This would work better in a class with a teacher and other people. That was from somebody who really struggled with it. And then he would just use YouTube videos to clear up any confusion. So not as great from the student learning individual perspective, but definitely something that I would recommend if you are actually able to teach this as a class. And I know a lot of us aren't necessarily able to do that, just with the way things have been going. At least here, I can never get anybody come into a class, no matter how many times I try. So it's kind of a mixed bag with that. We are right now in the process of rethinking what we're doing, and we're going to pull back in some of our resources that we've gotten from, say, New Readers Press and kind of combine them with some of the things. One of the lessons we got a lot of really good feedback on was like volume, because then you talk about the room, the classroom that you're in. Think about this as we want to store things. Now we're going to use it for a storage unit, but we need to know how many boxes of this same size we can fit in here. And I actually was able to get some boxes and bring them in, and they could practice stacking them up. And it was a good way to move them into thinking about volume. So we are rethinking things a little bit and how we want to do things. But I do put that out there as if you want a tool that kind of helps you if you're teaching in classes, use this one. I'm going to skip that slide. So I want to spend more time asking everybody here, what are you currently doing for math and what is making you scared? What are you struggling with? Does anybody want to share what they are currently doing for teaching math?
You can put in the chat, or if you would like to unmute, we're relatively, or raise your hand, we can call on you.
I have a very generic question. And having been a tech college instructor who avoided teaching math as much as I could, I noticed my students had terrible math anxiety.
Yes.
Is there anything that you or I as an instructor can do to kind of help allay some of that?
So one of the things that I always do is just be like, I'm not a math person. I just get there and I say, I'm not a math person. This is what I'm going to do with it. And I talk about examples and how it can be used, which I'm sure we all probably do. But I also kind of tend to just be like, the more anxious I am about it, the more anxious they're going to be feeling. And again, dealing with people who have that educational trauma, you can't do that. You need to be able to bring them into a place that is comfortable to them. So I have in my classroom space, which is where I send people when they're, even if they're going to work independently, I have a lot of, they're all out there. I'm in my office space. I have a lot of like things that they can play with. So like this is the one that I have in here right now. But like I have like Happy Meal leftover things for my kids that I bring in so people can play with. I have whiteboards all over the place. They know they can get up and they can use the big whiteboards. And I actually have a lovely drawing out there right now from one of my people who's like, I need a break. I gotta do something just to get up and move and groove and wiggle. Um, so I do a lot of those types of things with them. And I'm always constantly like, I know it's hard to ask questions for a lot of people. So I will do a lot of checking in. Initially, I just kind of give them their space because I'm a person who, like, if you're asking me constantly or over my shoulder, I will just get up and leave and walk away. And that's not what I want people to experience when they come in here. So I make sure that I am trying to be like, hey, make sure, this question, I know it confuses a lot of people. So, like, when you get to it, here's my piece of advice. So those types of things that I do. But I think addressing it, I think is insane. Like, I know you don't want to be doing this. I know that you're scared. And I know it's going to hold you up. I just had somebody who spent 2 years doing math. He didn't even try doing anything else. He was so anxious about it. And we kind of talked about it quite a bit and getting him more comfortable. And I said, look, you've been doing these just 2 out of those 7 workbooks for the last year. Let's try a test. Don't worry if you don't pass it. I got resources. Let's just try it. Let's see how it's going. Um, so he did the test and he did a GED ready test and he actually passed with a 151. So I was like, all right, this is amazing. See, you did know things. And I knew from talking with him that he definitely had a lot more math background than he realized as well. And so it was getting him to realize he knew more and to be comfortable was the big thing. Um, so I'm just looking. So we've got Western Text, Project Proven, um, Enlightened Salt Learning. Thank you for putting the website in there too, because I'm all about sharing resources. Um, so when you think about the resources that you are currently using, do they address some of that anxiety? Do they address some of your anxiety? Or are you just like, I just have to do it because it's part of my job? Because I know for me, I initially was like, I have to do this as part of my job. I have a second instructor working with me now, and she's kind of like, yeah, I don't want to teach math. Again, you went further in math than I did. You got all the way to calculus in high school. I have not once in all my many times in college and my multiple degrees thought about taking calculus. So if math is making you anxious, how are you encouraging your students to get through their math? Are you encouraging them or are you just being like, nope, this is what you got to do?
I'd like to share an experience, Elizabeth.
Mhm.
So I was teaching numeracy, so really just teaching the numbers, writing the numbers, learning them to a group of students who didn't have higher education. And it was, they were also learning reading and writing in English as well. And one day we were talking about the travel loan that they had for their for coming to the United States as a refugee. And one of the women stated the amount of her travel loan. So it was like, $1,346 or something. And she came out with that number and I was just blown away because um here, we're working on recalling the names of individual numbers under 10. And the fact that she could pull out a number that was that complex was really eye-opening for me. And I believe it was because that number was so relevant and so important to her life that she was able to, that was something that she could talk about. So I think it's really important, and you touched on this in the beginning, for it to be it's important for it to be relevant to their life and applicable. And I think that, that's true of all things in adult learning theory, but I think especially for math, like I loved your example of looking at the couch and that can fit through the window. Let's talk about how, or, so
Right.
it needs to be something that somebody can actually visualize in real life. And if it's relevant to their life, that makes it, I guess you lose the fear of it and you start to see the value and the importance.
Yeah. The one example too that I gave about, let's take these boxes and put them up in the room. I had to laugh because the following week, that same person came back and she said, "You will never guess this. When I left here after that class, I went to work and they were doing some sort of activity, or they were building an activity to do at an event. And they came up with how many ice cubes will fit in the fish tank." And she was like, I literally just did everything you taught me right before in that. And she's like, "Why would I have ever used this skill?" And I said, "You know what? At the time I was moving houses. I'm like, I have this storage unit, which is not nearly big enough to put 20 years of living in one house into it, but I have to. So I am literally doing this right now. If I have 16 feet high, how high can I stack all my boxes?" Which then set off somebody else going, "Oh my God, we just did that and we had to do this." I mean, so finding those little ways, yes, absolutely, connecting it. And sometimes it is hard to explain why it matters. I think that's, to me, one thing why it's easier teaching math to adults is because they have those life experiences, and you can sit there and you can be like, "Yeah, this is what, let's talk about estimating. How much do you think if you're going to be able to spend on a kid's birthday party right now? How much do you think, are you going to put balloons up? How much are your balloons going to cost? Are you going to go for a big cake, or, you can make your own cake? If you're going to make your own cake, how much do you think it's going to cost for the mix? Or are you going to do it totally from scratch? You're going to go for a big Walmart cake. Walmart's right by the reservation. How much is that going to, and how many people are you going to feed? How many, you can do those things and talk about estimating. And then you can have them be like, "All right, you think it's going to be $5 for a pack of, whatever cups or something. Now let's look it up on Walmart and see how much it actually costs. Are you right? How do you know? Is this rounding up? Is this rounding down? Are you way off? What is your estimated?" So that actually is an activity that I do with a lot of them, kind of coming in to help them lose some of that anxiety. Kind of forgot about that till I started talking about it. But applying what they know currently on how they do things already in their life helps with it as well. Let's see anything else. Are the ice cubes melting as they are placed in the fish tank? There was no water in the fish tank. They were just supposed to guess how many ice cubes could fit in the fish tank. That was the ultimate goal. But they were trying to figure out how many ice cubes actually could fit in there. And their solution was they were just going to take individual ice cubes and put them in. And she was able to back up and say, "Wait a second, there's a mathematical way to do this," which was pretty impressive for somebody who had never taken geometry, never set foot in a geometry class. Let me see here. So, have you in your organizations made any decisions on how you're going to teach math? Have you talked about it, or is your organization just you? Because like here, there's a staff of 5 of us, but I make all the decisions for some reason when it comes to doing all of the teaching stuff. Did you make any decisions to kind of help lessen math anxiety, or help make it be that this is something that they could do? I don't know. It's just kind of a question that I was curious about for other people. So what could you do if you know that people are coming in with this? What could you do that would apply? to what they're doing. I didn't ask that right, but I know what I'm trying to say. Hopefully that's coming across. I'm one of those annoying people who's used to, I'm just a facilitator. Everybody else should be talking as much. That's why I keep asking these questions. I probably should have specified that at the beginning. Something that they know and go from there. I think that's really that's the number one basic thing that I think I usually do with them. And it's the other thing too, I will also mention just in working with, not all of my learners are Oneida, not all of my learners are Native, but there are definitely different ways of approaching things and how different groups of people do that are just, you don't think that they would be. This part of the whole thing, why I was at the conference I was at last week. One example I can give is there was a student I had when she was in 6th grade. And then when I moved to the high school, she came to the high school I was at later on. She had a math class with the teacher next door to me. That teacher came and found me and she was like, do you know about this particular student? And I was like, oh yeah, I've known her for a long time. And she's like, okay, does she do things a little weird? And I said, what are you talking about? And she's like, well, this was an advanced geometry, I think. It was an advanced math class. She said, well, we were talking about this today in school, and she just wasn't getting it. She came back during her study hall to ask me a question. And whatever it was that the teacher said, student all of a sudden rattled off something that made no sense to the teacher. But at the end of it, she got the answer. And I said, well, what did she talk about? And she started talking about some cultural stuff. And I was like, well, what were you teaching? And this was, I don't know, I think 16 years ago almost. So I don't exactly remember what it was. And I was like, oh yeah, I know exactly what her line of thinking is. And absolutely, that would make perfect sense as to how she put those pieces together. And the math teacher was super confused, but she started paying attention to sometimes the student was going to think about things in a different way. So again, going back to the activity in the beginning, people have different ways to do things and different ways to do activities. That was for me. And I hear that from my kids who I've got one in college, one in high school, all the time. It's like their math teachers are always telling them, you can't do it that way. And their response is always, did I get the right answer? Then yeah, I understand what you're telling me. This is still getting me to the right answer. And it's okay. Luckily, one of them has a math teacher that understands. The other one no longer has to do math anymore. So that makes it easier on me. The youngest one, though, yeah, a long way to go with her. Okay. So some of the things that I have is I provide everybody with different resources. So I don't know how many of these look familiar to any of you, if these are ones that you've ever seen. Like I said before, I have out in my classroom a lot of things for people to play with. One of the things that I have, I don't think it's out right now because it keeps getting used in another part of the building, is I have a giant, like Sam's Club size bucket of cheese balls that's full of these little wooden dowels. And that's probably my number one favorite manipulative to use with people. So they have something that they can move around and they can adjust. And I'm constantly telling people, get up and move, do things, do something, move around the room. There's something here that's going to help you with everything that you need to do. And I will, when we get to things, people are doing things that require them to graph. I have poster-sized graphing paper that I will tape to the wall and be like, don't sit there and try and get frustrated here. Get up and see it bigger. Move perspective. That will also help see what you need to do. So I had somebody who was getting frustrated with the measuring in volume and area and multiplication. So she actually went over and measured my office door just to give herself a break from what was going on, and then found the area of the door and then applied that to a bunch of different stuff. So brain breaks in that sense, I guess it would be one other thing I would say. But keeping them within the realm of doing math, but something that's different so that they can back up and see what they're doing. That's another thing that I do to help with that. What other resources do people have? I saw coolmath.com, Light and Salt Learning. What other resources do you have that are like your absolute favorite that you rely on and you're willing to share with people? Sticky notes for area. I think I've done something like that too. I need to say, this is one thing I've noticed before in adult ed. I don't know if it's just me, is that sharing of resources sometimes comes a little hard. And I think it's because we have to fight for our resources to find them.
Elizabeth,
Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question for you as we're talking about resources. What strategies do you use when you're working with the student to help find what resource is going to work best for them, or the way that the student their way to find a solution to
Yeah.
a problem?
Usually I'm kind of sitting down working with them more one-on-one. We usually set up when a student comes in, we were having them start with math. Now we're not having them start with math because we're finding that just leading to not success. So we're having them start with doing a financial literacy, which kind of introduces math in a way that they can understand it, I think, a little bit better, but then also focuses on something else that isn't strictly math. So usually by the time we're ready to do math with them, we have a clue already where they kind of are at. Are they going to be a person who is like, just give me my phone? Are they a person who's going to be like, I need to do that moving and grooving? We're finding that a lot too. Is we are all about get up and walk around the building. We are also finding that we've got a couple right now that are very artistic driven. So he likes to somehow, and I don't know how he does it. Again, I got art on my whiteboard right now. He'll actually draw out in different ways to do math problems. It makes sense to him. I don't personally understand it, but he understands it. And as long as that's helping him, then that's what we're for. So just kind of spending time knowing what they need. It did not surprise me when my artist was like, I came back in to check on him at one point, and my whiteboard was just full of this intricate design. I'm like, you are doing your homework. And he's like, oh, yeah, look, see right here. That's this problem, and that's this. Sometimes it's a wild guess. Native people got a reputation of being very quiet. Not necessarily always true, but sometimes we don't like to ask questions. There's certain expectations about asking for help. So how we ask for help is done a little bit differently. So you need to be able to understand those cues. So sometimes it's just as simple as like, you're on that problem here. Here's my one tip. Use the big ruler. Don't use the little ruler. It'll make more sense. Things like that. So just kind of watching and getting to know them. I don't have the luxury of teaching in big classes, or maybe it's not a luxury, but in my opinion, it would sometimes be okay. Everything is very individual here. So what we know about our student is how we're going to help them be the most success. Anybody got any other resources? Okay, so I'm going to go back to this slide for just a second. Math is the cornerstone. There is it's not a story. It's supposed to be a mnemonic, I guess, in Oneida that we lost. People know it existed, but we don't know it fully anymore. There was a mnemonic that they used to use to teach kids their numbers that dealt with our medicine plants. I believe what I was told was that tobacco was number one. Corn, beans, and squash were 2, 3, and 4. Strawberry was 5, and then there was number 6. And there is a plant known in Oneida as number 6. We call it number 6. Nobody ever calls it by whatever its name is. Most people don't even realize what it is. It's wild bergamot. They're all medicine plants to us. They're all very important plants to us. And it actually went supposedly all the way up to 100. So that cornerstone of civilization, it definitely is something that it's math. We don't think about it as math, but it is definitely math. So finding a way to connect it back. I do a lot of kind of pulling in different bits and pieces as best as I can. Math is not easy to do that with, but I try to find those connections. And that's probably why this is sticking with me, is I got to spend more time bringing everything back to how it applies to our culture. So again, all right. Any questions? I feel like I was a little all over the place, but any questions? Okay.
Let's see, Shirley, you have your hand up.
Right. She mentioned a mnemonic that started with tobacco, but did you ever tell us what the thing was that you were learning? What was the word or the phrases that you were learning to teach you math?
I don't know it in the language. All I know is that there was a method of counting that it was done as, somehow the whole thing went with number 1 is tobacco, then there's corn, beans, and squash. Strawberry is number 5 because it also had to do with parts of the bodies as well, because strawberry is the heart. And then there was number 6. Number 6 is wild bergamot. It's actually, we use it as a medicine plant when people have lung illnesses. So that's part of why it's number 6, because it's the number 6 spot in the body. It's the number 6 plant that was created by the creator. It's the number 6, medicine that's the most important medicine. That's what I learned it as, but that's as far as anybody remembers anymore. All we know is that it existed, but we don't have anybody left who can tell us what it was in the language, unfortunately, which is really sad. I wish we did.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else anybody would like to know? All right. Otherwise, this is contact information for me, and our very long website. And if you have any questions, you can always email me if you want to know any of these resources. I believe they're going to share the links, because I'm sure some people kind of wanted them. That's fine. But yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. This has been wonderful, and I'm not scared of math. And it's been a while since I've looked at a trapezoid, so this has been very exciting to be able to dive into math here. Thank you for presenting today, and thank you all for attending the session.